So it's not surprising to me because what they have to say doesn't make any sense. They just don't seem to get it. They don't seem to get it. They have to be guided by maybe the Europeans that sort of see what's on the screen.
Brian De Palma may be a legendary director, but he's not shy about naming enemies. Known for his fiery personality and bold filmmaking, the Scarface and Carrie mastermind has had some explosive clashes with Hollywood's biggest stars. Over the years, a few actors made it to the very top of his most hated list. Here are the 4 that De Palma simply couldn't stand. Robert De Niro. Before Robert De Niro became widely recognized as one of the most celebrated actors of his generation, his path to stardom was shaped, in part, by his early collaborations with Brian De Palma. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, De Niro took on leading roles in 2 of De Palma's low-budget experimental films, Greetings, 1968, and its follow-up, Hi Mom, 1970. These films, marked by their irreverent style, social satire, and unorthodox narrative structures, were far from mainstream, yet they offered De Niro something invaluable, a platform to inhabit complex, edgy, and provocative characters. For De Niro, these projects represented his first major opportunities to carry a film, and they laid the groundwork for the raw, intense performances that would later define his career. De Niro's work with De Palma was, however, not without its challenges. By all accounts, he was an actor of extraordinary instinct and commitment, yet especially in those formative years, he did not always conform to the conventional expectations of preparation. De Palma has recounted in interviews that one of the recurring difficulties on set was De Niro's habit of arriving without having memorized his lines. Scenes often began with the young actor relying on De Palma to feed him dialogue, sometimes word by word, before he could perform. Bobby was brilliant, but he had this habit of showing up without knowing his dialogue, De Palma explained. I'd have to feed him his lines before a scene. It was frustrating, but at the same time you couldn't deny his ability to bring a character to life. This unconventional approach required a level of patience and adaptability from De Palma that tested even a director already accustomed to experimentation and improvisation. The scripts for Greetings and Hi Mom were themselves innovative, blending satire, dark humor, and political commentary in ways that demanded flexibility from everyone on set. De Niro's improvisational tendencies, though occasionally a source of frustration, also brought an unpredictable vitality to his performances. There were moments when his instinctual choices elevated scenes in ways that even the director had not anticipated, revealing the raw talent that would eventually make him a legendary figure in American cinema. The collaboration also highlights the dynamics of early career relationships between directors and actors, especially in low-budget filmmaking. Working without the structure of a major studio meant that much of the production relied on ingenuity and quick thinking. De Palma and De Niro had to negotiate not only the practical challenges of shooting on a shoestring budget, but also the artistic tensions that arise when working with talent whose methods diverge from conventional norms. The necessity of feeding De Niro his lines became, paradoxically, part of the creative process, forcing De Palma to remain constantly engaged and responsive in ways that a more traditional collaboration might not have demanded. Despite the occasional exasperation, De Palma and De Niro maintained a strong and productive professional relationship. There was mutual respect underlying the challenges. De Niro recognized De Palma's vision and willingness to take risks, while De Palma recognized the young actor's innate ability to transform into his characters. In many ways, the experience foreshadowed De Niro's future approach to acting, a relentless commitment to truth in performance, often prioritizing instinct and emotional authenticity over rigid adherence to the script. The lessons learned on these early sets undoubtedly informed De Palma's later work with other actors, shaping his understanding of how to harness talent that operates outside traditional structures. Crucially, De Niro's performances in De Palma's films caught the attention of other influential figures in the industry. Martin Scorsese, who was seeking a leading man for his gritty, street-level drama Mean Streets, 1973, noticed the intensity, nuance, and magnetic presence that De Niro displayed in greetings and "Hi, Mom." This connection proved transformative for De Niro's career. Scorsese's casting of De Niro as the volatile yet sympathetic Charlie C. marked the beginning of a legendary partnership that would include iconic films such as Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, and Goodfellas. De Palma's early collaboration had, in effect, helped pave the way for De Niro's entry into cinematic immortality, providing the first platform for an actor who would redefine intensity and commitment on screen. Reflecting on these experiences, De Palma has often emphasized the dual nature of working with extraordinary yet unconventional talent. The chaos of De Niro's preparation, or lack thereof, was balanced by the brilliance he brought to every scene. This tension between frustration and admiration became a defining aspect of De Palma's early directing career, teaching him the delicate art of managing actors whose genius does not always align with conventional expectations. In interviews, he has framed these collaborations not as trials, but as critical learning experiences, revealing the sometimes messy reality behind the polished performances that audiences would come to associate with great cinema. Orson Welles. In the early 1970s, Brian De Palma, a promising yet relatively untested director, embarked on what should have been an exciting opportunity, directing the legendary Orson Welles in Get to Know Your Rabbit. The project, an eccentric and offbeat comedy about a businessman who abandons his humdrum life to become a tap-dancing magician, was already unconventional, a departure from the thriller and suspense work that De Palma had begun to carve out for himself. Welles was cast as Mr. D'Alessandro, the enigmatic mentor who guides the protagonist on his whimsical journey. On paper, this pairing promised a meeting of inventive minds, a collaboration that might elevate both the material and De Palma's growing reputation in Hollywood. Yet the reality on set was far more complicated, and for the young director, deeply disheartening. Welles, by this point, was already a towering figure in cinema, celebrated for his masterpieces such as Citizen Kane and Touch of Evil, and his status as an auteur was virtually unquestioned. But his genius came with a notorious reputation for unpredictability and obstinacy, qualities that would challenge even seasoned directors. For De Palma, who was still learning to navigate the hierarchical and often treacherous terrain of Hollywood production, these difficulties were magnified. The first and most immediate challenge was Welles's approach to acting on set. Unlike the disciplined performers De Palma had worked with previously, or would work with later, Welles refused to internalize his lines in any conventional sense. According to De Palma, Welles often relied entirely on improvisation or on having lines fed to him by assistants. While improvisation can sometimes ignite brilliance in performance, in this case, it proved chaotic. Scenes had to be repeatedly reset, blocking was thrown off schedule, and the rhythm of the shoot suffered. For a director trying to impose structure and maintain a coherent vision, Welles's improvisational style felt less like artistic spontaneity and more like disinterest. It was a crushing experience, De Palma later admitted in interviews reflecting on the ordeal. He would come to the set completely unprepared. He had this incredible presence, of course, but when it came to actually doing the work, it was as if he didn't care. That presence, while magnetic, only underscored the contrast between Welles's command of a room and his disregard for the practicalities of shooting a film. De Palma, who had admired Welles from afar, found himself frustrated by the necessity of coaxing, cajoling, and negotiating just to get a scene completed. The young director's vision was continually compromised. Not because Welles lacked talent, but because he often seemed disengaged from the day-to-day demands of production. Adding further tension was Welles's own deep-seated resentment toward the Hollywood system. By the 1970s, Welles had already experienced the bitter realities of studio interference, from the truncated release of The Magnificent Ambersons to the financial difficulties surrounding his later projects. On Get to Know Your Rabbit, Welles's grievances frequently erupted into confrontations with studio executives and producers. De Palma, still relatively new to the intricacies of studio politics, found himself caught in the crossfire. He had to mediate between a legend who felt mistreated by the industry and a production team striving to stay on schedule and within budget. The young director had not anticipated that a creative collaboration could so swiftly become a logistical and emotional quagmire. Beyond the immediate frustrations, the experience left a lasting mark on De Palma's understanding of Hollywood filmmaking. He realized, in stark terms, that a director's role often involves navigating not just creative challenges, but interpersonal and institutional ones. The project reinforced the uncomfortable truth that even working with genius-level talent could be isolating and thankless. His early career had been buoyed by a sense of artistic possibility. The clash with Wells was a sobering initiation into the complexities of commercial filmmaking. It was not merely a lesson in patience. It was an encounter that shaped his perception of power, authority, and collaboration in Hollywood. De Palma has recounted that, despite the difficulties, he could not deny Wells's brilliance. The veteran actor-director brought an aura and presence that elevated the scenes he was in, even when his preparation, or lack thereof, made the work arduous. There was an unmistakable electricity in Wells's performance, moments when his instinctive genius shone through the chaos. These flashes, however, were interspersed with long stretches of improvisation that disrupted the cohesion of the film. For De Palma, the project became a test of resilience, how to harness brilliance without being undone by it, how to maintain authority without alienating a revered figure. Tommy Smothers. While the presence of Orson Welles on Get to Know Your Rabbit brought its own complexities, it was the film's lead, Tommy Smothers, who emerged as the true test of Brian De Palma's patience, authority, and resilience as a director. Smothers, widely recognized as a comedian and television personality, was known for his sharp wit, improvisational humor, and irreverent charm on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. These qualities, which had won him fame in television, made him an appealing choice for the offbeat satirical world of De Palma's comedy about a businessman turned tap-dancing magician. Yet this unconventional casting decision proved to be a double-edged sword. Smothers' comedic instincts, which thrived on spontaneity and improvisation, clashed sharply with De Palma's vision for a tightly structured, stylistically precise film. From the outset, tension between director and star was apparent. De Palma, then a young filmmaker with limited authority in the Hollywood hierarchy, had a clear sense of the rhythm, pacing, and tone he wanted to establish. Smothers, however, often resisted these ideas, preferring to inject his own comedic sensibilities into the scenes. Tommy didn't like a lot of my ideas, De Palma later recalled. He had his own way of doing things, and it didn't always align with what I was trying to achieve. The divergence in approach was more than a minor inconvenience. It struck at the heart of the collaborative process, challenging De Palma's ability to maintain coherence in his storytelling while accommodating the whims of a strong-willed star. As production progressed, Smothers' behavior became increasingly erratic. He would occasionally leave the set without notice, delaying filming and creating an atmosphere of uncertainty. Scenes had to be reset, schedules rearranged, and crew morale maintained, all while trying to preserve the film's creative vision. For a young director still establishing his authority, these disruptions were not merely logistical hurdles. They represented the emotional labor and negotiation required to shepherd a project through an unpredictable environment. De Palma found himself navigating a delicate balance, asserting control without alienating a star whose popularity and comedic presence were central to the project's marketability. The friction extended beyond the immediate logistics of shooting. Smothers' dissatisfaction with the production ran deep, leading him to lobby studio executives to delay the film's release. His influence, combined with Welles' own complex presence and the film's unconventional tone, created a perfect storm of creative tension. The result was a production fraught with instability, highlighting the challenges inherent in working with personalities accustomed to having the spotlight and their ideas take precedence. For De Palma, who had envisioned a playful but controlled exploration of satire and absurdity, These clashes underscored the unpredictable nature of directing actors with strong personal brands and well-established public personas. The aftermath of Get to Know Your Rabbit further illuminated the harsh realities of Hollywood filmmaking. Warner Brothers, frustrated by the film's extended production and the challenges it posed, ultimately lost confidence in the project. In a move that was both symbolic and practical, the studio removed De Palma from the editing process, effectively stripping him of control over the final product. For a young director eager to assert his creative voice, the experience was a sobering introduction to the limits of artistic authority in a system dominated by star power and studio interests. The film, which might have been an early showcase for De Palma's emerging style and cinematic sensibility, became instead a cautionary tale about the unpredictable interplay between talent, ego, and institutional priorities. Yet within this adversity, De Palma gained a formative understanding of the realities of filmmaking in Hollywood. He learned firsthand that managing strong personalities, whether legendary figures like Wells or improvisational stars like Smothers, requires not only creative skill but diplomacy, patience, and resilience. The challenges of the set forced him to confront the tension between artistic intention and pragmatic compromise, lessons that would inform his approach to later projects, where collaboration with high-profile actors could be both a source of brilliance and frustration. De Palma has reflected on Get to Know Your Rabbit not with bitterness, but with measured insight. While the production was difficult, it was also instructive. It demonstrated that the path of a director, particularly a young and ambitious one, is rarely linear. Even when working with exceptionally talented individuals, success is not guaranteed. It is contingent upon negotiation, adaptation, and, sometimes, sheer endurance in the face of unpredictability. The film thus became emblematic of the early trials that shaped De Palma's career, moments where he confronted the mercurial nature of Hollywood personalities and learned the limits and responsibilities of the director's role. Oliver Stone. Brian De Palma's reputation as a meticulous, visually daring director has always been paired with his willingness to collaborate closely with writers, yet these partnerships have not always been seamless. One of the most striking examples occurred during the making of Scarface, 1983, when De Palma worked with the then-rising screenwriter Oliver Stone. Stone, who would later become celebrated for films like Platoon, Wall Street, and JFK, brought to the project a fierce energy and an unflinching vision of crime, violence, and the dark side of ambition. His screenplay for Scarface was visceral, ambitious, and uncompromising. A perfect match for the story of Tony Montana, the Cuban immigrant who rises to power in Miami's cocaine underworld. Yet this synergy of talent also sparked friction as two strong creative minds collided on set. De Palma, already a director known for his precision, tracking shots, and intense control over visual storytelling, found Stone's approach both inspiring and challenging. Stone had a forceful, sometimes confrontational personality, and he was deeply protective of his script. He envisioned certain moments, lines, and character beats in very specific ways, and he was unafraid to voice disagreement if he felt the interpretation on set deviated from his intent. While writers often remained behind the scenes during filming, Stone's presence on Scarface was pronounced, and his assertiveness created tension with De Palma, who viewed the director's role as the ultimate authority over the production. One particular incident crystallized this clash of visions. During a heated exchange on set, De Palma reached his breaking point with Stone's interventions. According to reports, he firmly asserted his authority, telling Stone, "You're the writer. You don't get to direct this movie. Get off my set." The confrontation underscored the delicate power dynamics inherent in filmmaking. The writer provides the blueprint, but it is the director who must orchestrate performance, pacing, and visual storytelling. For De Palma, Stone's insistence threatened to blur that line. Yet the episode also reflected the intensity and passion both men brought to the project. a shared desire to make Scarface not merely a crime film, but a cultural landmark. Despite the friction, the professional respect between De Palma and Stone remained intact. Stone later acknowledged the intensity of their collaboration and the challenges of working under a director with a precise and exacting vision, noting that the experience, while tense, was formative and productive. He recognized that De Palma's control over the visual style, pacing, and tone of the film elevated the screenplay beyond its written form. The two men, through disagreement and negotiation, pushed each other toward a final product that was far greater than either could have achieved alone. This dynamic, of friction fueling creativity, has often been cited as a hallmark of landmark filmmaking, where the tension between writer and director produces a heightened artistic outcome. The tension between De Palma and Stone also highlighted the balance between narrative and cinematic interpretation. Stone's script was unapologetically raw, filled with sharp dialogue, morally ambiguous characters, and unflinching depictions of violence. De Palma, however, approached the material with his own stylistic sensibilities. Bold camera movements, carefully choreographed sequences, and meticulous attention to detail. Integrating Stone's intense dialogue-driven scenes with his visual style required negotiation, compromise, and at times, assertive enforcement of the director's vision. The incident where Stone was told to leave the set symbolized the necessity of delineating roles on a film. Writers inspire, directors execute. Both, however, were vital to the alchemy that made Scarface a cinematic touchstone. The creative clashes, while challenging during production, arguably contributed to the film's lasting power. The tension generated a charged atmosphere on set that translated to the screen, giving the performances, most notably Al Pacino's portrayal of Tony Montana, a palpable intensity. Every character interaction, moment of violence, and dramatic beat was imbued with the kind of urgency and authenticity that emerges when creative passion collides. De Palma's insistence on maintaining control ensured visual and tonal coherence, while Stone's insistence on character integrity and narrative edge guaranteed emotional and moral intensity. Together, their clash became a crucible in which Scarface was forged, resulting in a film whose impact continues to resonate decades later. Moreover, this episode offers insight into De Palma's broader approach to collaboration. He is a director who thrives on clarity of vision, but he is not indifferent to the contributions of others. When working with writers, actors, or production staff, De Palma navigates the tension between control and collaboration with a mixture of firmness and flexibility. The conflict with Stone illustrates his philosophy in microcosm. A director must assert authority to preserve coherence and narrative integrity, yet must also remain open to ideas that enhance the story. The friction is not a failure of collaboration, but an essential component of crafting a complex, memorable film. What do you think about the actors that Brian De Palma hates? Leave us your comments in the section below. We hope you have found this helpful video. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like it. Thank you for watching this, and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.